Within all of the three global health systems, there are childbirth concepts. They're mostly cultural, but only in modern societies are there systems such as Lamaze and Bradley. What do you know about childbirth concepts or trends? So I'd like you to think about that now using these parameters. What are the ideas that motivate the concept or trend, and the words and the messages that then convey the ideas? There will be actions that implement the ideas, as well as goals or desired results. Some of these concepts will be put into systems. Rarely will they be put into policies. There will be successes and gaps, and this impacts both the consumer, the women who are giving birth and their families, as well as the delivery of service. And these childbirth concepts or trends all exist within how the three healthcare systems deal with the three global goals: live mother and a live baby, suffering and recovery for the mother and baby, short, medium, and long term. So I'd like you to keep in mind these 8 fields. In reality, when we don't know what we've been working with or what we're working with now, then we can't bring forward something else. We did what we did, and when we know better, we do better. So take some time to write down the present childbirth concept that is in your larger geographical area. Writing will give you reflection and perception, and use those 8 fields mentioned. Now write down the childbirth concept your grandparents birthed in, and then the one your parents birthed in, the one you birthed in if you've had children, and the one your children have birthed in if they've had children. And now write down your ideal one, both from the viewpoint of the consumer's use of the system and the system that delivers services to the consumer. Childbirth concepts and trends change. They're embedded in culture, and they impact the individual, the family, the geographical area, the larger political units, the culture, religion, economic development, and governments. In and around all these childbirth concepts and trends, Common Knowledge Trust is inviting ICPA members to bring forward a new or revitalized childbirth concept, which is to encourage the growth of a self-learning, skilled birthing population for all births. This is fully explained in the How to Do This in the pilot project video. ICPA has the capacity to spread this new concept globally and to begin to embed this new concept across cultures and health systems, because it focuses on the universal, how any individual can use this all-inclusive childbirth concept for their individual birth. In other words, if the majority of expectant families think that it's common sense and beneficial to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills from any of the skills-based methods that are now available, and others that will hopefully grow from this new concept, then they will do the activity of birthing their baby with a set of skills, along with who's at the birth, where they birth, their beliefs, the health systems around them, their circumstances, their choices or lack of choices or change of choices, or what happens to or around them at the birth. In other words, becoming skilled is about what we do as we do the activity of birthing our baby. You've now thought about the childbirth concepts. You know the local ones, the ones your grandparents, your parents, yourself, your children, or your ideal one, and you can refer to what you've written down again and again and tease out the subtleties of these concepts and how they impact childbirth. I'm familiar with 3 childbirth concepts, and I was fortunate enough to work with hundreds of mothers and fathers to create a 4th one, which I'm going to talk to you about. When I've worked globally in diverse cultures, all of them are working within the first childbirth concept, which is global and universal. Then when I gave birth first in 1970, I gave birth in a second childbirth concept. And when I gave birth last in 1982, both of my births were in the US, I gave birth in another childbirth concept. So as we go through these, keep in mind those 8 fields. And also keep in mind the 3 global childbirth goals. Number 1, most important, a live mother and a live baby. Number 2, suffering. And number 3, recovery of the mother and baby, short, medium, and long term. So what is this childbirth concept that existed throughout time and place in all cultures? Well, it's simple. You already know the answer in your mind. You've just not been asked to attach it to anything. This broad childbirth universal concept is based on the fact that birth is unknown and unknowable until it unfolds. And really, until it's over. We know what that global truth is. There's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. And it's followed by a potent sentence. Therefore, there's nothing you can really do to prepare for it. In other words, around the world in all cultures, this is the childbirth concept. Risks are recognized or unknown. Problems arise and either resolve themselves, get resolved through assistance, or in rare cases become tragedies. Suffering isn't liked, but it's accepted. Recovery, everybody hopes for it, but there's not much that people actually can do. So this number 1 concept is inclusive of all births without exception and within all cultures without exception, whether those cultures are based on traditional healthcare and modern healthcare or natural healthcare. Pregnancy and childbirth or normal life events, birth is unknown and unknowable really until it's over. And there's no way to know what your birth is going to be like. Because each village and culture has a sophisticated traditional health system, that is geographical and uses what's available and is also blended with spirituality. Within this childbirth concept, they're still all trying to positively impact the number 1 goal. And we talk about that in the healthcare video, how we bookend pregnancy before birth and how we put a bookend up after birth into the newborn period. And what are the successes of this childbirth concept? Well, they mostly just happen. Everybody does the best they can. Most women get through birth. They're alive, their baby's alive. And then they get into parenting. Life continues. And what are the gaps? Well, birth just happens. So gaps occur because it's unknown until birth starts. How women suffer or not unfolds as birth unfolds. And being alive and recovering happens after birth. So gaps tend to exist individually. My grandmothers and my mother birthed in this trend. My grandmother's birthed without modern medicine, and my mother birthed within modern medicine. But after World War II, this amazing thing happened, which was that the first ever childbirth classes were taught to my generation of post-World War II families. The classes were taught in the United States and perhaps in your country from the 50s to the 70s. New Zealand had a different situation, which I'll talk about in another video. This concept, the second childbirth concept or trend, is known as the skills-based childbirth trend. And I gave birth first in that trend. So please keep in mind those 8 fields and the 3 global goals. The rise of this new childbirth concept or trend, the skills-based one, is a perfect example of how a whole society and culture can shift in how they approach childbirth. So this skills-based childbirth trend in the United States was led by Lamaze and Bradley, and in New Zealand by Grantley Dick Reed. It was the first ever organized childbirth concept or trend. Did it occur in your country? In the United States, there was a very, very high societal expectation for my generation of families to attend a Lamaze or Bradley class. Lamaze was taught in most hospitals. All 3 systems, Lamaze, Bradley, and Grantley Dick Reed, were developed by 3 male obstetricians, and they focused exclusively on low-risk women. But many of us who attended Lamaze classes didn't fit into that category. And when low-risk women and men, because fathers were birth coaches, Bradley was called husband-coached childbirth or father-coached childbirth. And fathers were coming into hospitals because we as women demanded that. The belief was that low-risk families that learned breathing and relaxation and trusted birth could have, and these are the results of the goals, a natural birth, pain-free labor without medical interventions. Lamaze was taught in hospitals, and in the 50s to the 70s, the majority of American families went into the hospital, where there are a lot of assessments, monitoring, procedures. So we used the skills within a system where we had no choices, and there were lots of assessments, monitoring, procedures. And our husbands were there to help us cope and manage, work through, deal with, handle, stay on top of, and feel in control. That second childbirth concept, the skills-based trend, still accepted the first childbirth trend. You never know what your birth is going to be like. But now that was followed with, there's something that you can do about it if you're low risk. The success was incredibly important, but not recognized, and profoundly alterative to my generation. But the gaps ended up leading to the demise of this skills-based method because the gaps were not inclusive of 100% of pregnant women. And after a generation, both in New Zealand and in the United States, when the natural birth movement and the natural wellness movement looked at skills-based approach, not enough low-risk women who learned those skills achieved those three goals: natural birth, pain-free labor without medical care. So the medical profession in the United States, the obstetrical nurses and the obstetricians, were looking for those defined goals and results that came along with the ideas, the message, the actions. And the natural birth movement felt not enough women achieved those goals. But the successes that were achieved weren't the ones focused on. And the successes came with dealing with the second global childbirth goal, which was suffering. Most of us who took Lamaze or Bradley and used skills to any level, no matter how our birth unfolded, we coped better. And we had husbands or partners who helped us do that. So the successes were profound. That meant obstetrical nurses and obstetricians throughout the United States saw multiple millions of birthing women and coaching dads working through the activity of birthing their baby with some level of skills. Now, another gap was that the skills were not easy to adapt or adjust and often weren't sustainable. And this is why Birthing Better Families focused on the concept of being inclusive to all births, learning some skills, and developing more skills that were adjustable and adaptable and sustainable, and a broader range of them as well. So what changed? How did we move from the skills-based trend of the 50s and 70s to the choice-based trend? That had to do with the fact that the success was not recognized. Global goal number 2, suffering, was not a high priority for the natural birth movement, and the medical profession dealt with it by giving pain relief. And the three goals of the skills-based concept, to have a natural birth, pain-free labor without medical care, didn't mention the suffering or the benefits to women and men who work through the activity of birthing their baby and feel that they coped well. So by the late 70s, both in New Zealand and the US, and you know about your country, the skills-based method went out of fashion. And this is where Birthing Better Families and myself were saying, no, we just need to develop a greater range of skills. We wanted skills to evolve. That's why we created Birthing Better. But there was a very, very loud, coordinated group of natural birth advocates and home birth midwives. They could see that low-risk women weren't achieving those three desired goals. They didn't see the successes. They focused on the medical profession that is anxious about birth and the way that they deal with that global statement that pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events was to do lots of assessments, monitoring, and procedures in order to pick up risks, to solve problems, and to prevent tragedies. And remember what you've learned in the video on the 3 health systems. So instead of blending skills with the new desired idea, choice, skills were actively dismissed. Cows and cats aren't taught to birth. Women don't need to. Fathers shouldn't be coaching. They shouldn't be telling women what to do. Childbirth classes shifted from skills-based preparation to choice-based information. The natural wellness and the natural birth model believed that the medical profession was preventing women from achieving those three goals. So please keep in mind those 8 fields and the 3 global childbirth goals. And once again, this is a perfect example of how you can shift a whole society and culture within a childbirth trend. If we use these 2 examples, ICPA and Common Knowledge Trust, which has been working for 50 years, can finally heal this rift and move forward to advocate for a self-learning, skilled birthing population. That if there are choices available, that's wonderful. If there aren't choices available or they change, being skilled means you can work through the activity of birthing your baby. This next childbirth concept is called the choice-based childbirth trend. It was based on ideas that women know what kind of birth they want, that they just need to choose that birth and then be given that birth in delivery of service. The same goals plus others were at the root of the choice-based system. The focus was on low-risk women choosing the birth that they wanted, now being able to choose a midwife, to have a home birth, to birth in water. It was quite anti-medical and once again not inclusive of the 100% of pregnant women who are going to give birth. But it was the same goals. If you choose, you were going to choose to say no to medical interventions because that was the word that replaced assessments, monitoring, and procedures. And interventions now were implied to be intrusive, unnecessary, and imposed on women. So when you write a birth plan, you're writing a birth plan to say no to medical care. This became a problem in New Zealand, and I'll discuss that in the video on the amazing New Zealand midwifery model of care. What happened in this choice-based trend, and we see it increasingly, is the rise of shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, anger, and psychological trauma from your choices not unfolding as you wanted, and believing that you were not a participant in informed consent. So here we are. So let me ask you, what was your ideal childbirth concept or trend? I know that many ICPA members identify strongly with the natural birth movement, and they would like a midwifery-led maternity system, or at least a blended system. And I go into, in depth, the New Zealand midwifery-led maternity system. It was put in place in 1990. And everything that the natural birth movement wanted was put in place, and so much more. It's an incredible system, and it's the best in the world. And I'll also explain why I worked from 1996 to 2020 to strengthen that partnership model. Now let me talk to you about this new revitalized concept that we're inviting ICPA members to bring forward into the world. And please keep in mind these 8 fields and the 3 global childbirth goals. You have to want to see the childbirth conversation change. And you have to be willing to do that with each of your expectant clients in your local area and extending outwards through the people that you work with, the doulas and the midwives and the childbirth educators. Because you know the reality and the truth that 100% of your expectant clients will give birth one way or the other, and that each of them is going to do that activity of birthing their baby. You also know that many of your clients lack choices, or their choices change, or they experience the birth in the way that the majority of us do, which is nothing like what I thought it would be like. So you can implant this new idea that it's beneficial and common sense within the salutogenesis model of having resources for oneself to deal with life stressors, which pregnancy and birth are. And you can encourage your clients all to become skilled, alongside writing their birth plan if that's important to them, Ultimately, this is a generational shift. Our belief is that it should have occurred in the 70s and the 80s, that we should never be where we are now. Skills and choices should go together. Skills should be stressed more than choices, because skills are what you use when you do an activity, and choices are merely what you want or don't want. And skills are inclusive of all where choices aren't. And when we as adults self-learn skills, both birth and coaching skills, and use them to work through our baby's birth, then we empower our families, both us as women and men. Because these two things didn't join when this concept was first evolving in the 70s and the 80s, no new skills-based methods, with the exception of Birthing Better, developed for 20 years, from the 70s to the 90s. So let me reiterate common knowledge trust role. I and hundreds of fathers and mothers, ordinary people from all walks of life, religions, and cultures, developed a universal concept around childbirth, strongly driven by families who wanted to empower their own birth, and felt that the Lamaze and Bradley and Grantley Dick Reed skills were a beginning but not sufficient, because they didn't adapt, adjust, and they weren't sustainable, nor were they targeted to all births. We drilled down on the concept in the 80s as this shift occurred from skills to choices. We were not a coordinated group of people like the natural birth movement was. Families asked me to carry forward this concept, and I spoke at national and international conferences of childbirth educators, midwives, home birth advocates, natural birth advocates, and found that this concept did not fit into what they wanted to see happen. So Common Knowledge Trust is inviting ICPA members to participate in this 2-year pilot project, which has 2 phases, and I talk about that in the next video. You want to share and elevate the concept in phase 1, and after you've done that for 6 months, then we are asking you to direct people to the pink kit that Jeannie had, which is the body skills of the Birthing Better skills that were developed primarily by fathers in the 1980s as the cesarean rate was going up and the tolerance for long births by consumers was going way down. So please watch the video on the pilot project after this video. So the goal of Birthing Better Families was always to grow a childbirth concept that was inclusive of all births, in which families empowered themselves via self-learning birth skills, and that fathers and mothers would have these skills or resources for themselves to work through the activity of birthing their baby, no matter where that birth occurred, the circumstances around it, or what happened to or around the birth at the time. Because the birth of each of our babies is important to each of us. Thinking back on those 8 fields, and thinking back on the concept of the gaps that occurred in the skills-based method and the gaps that have occurred in the present method, we also know there have been wonderful successes on an individual basis. But don't we want to extend that more to a greater range of people? And we do that by acknowledging that 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth, and recognizing that some level of skills can mean we birth better. It is very important to us that you stress the role of fathers or others as a birth coach. It was incredibly sad to us when the natural birth movement actively dismissed skills and actively dismissed fathers as being the ideal person to help his birthing partner work through the activity of birthing their baby. I'll talk about that in another video. I want you to think about this new childbirth concept in terms of the 3 childbirth goals: live mother and a live baby. Is this concept going to have anything to do with that? Think about global childbirth goal 2, suffering. Well, being skilled just means that you can cope better in all circumstances. So we should be able to greatly reduce the suffering in childbirth. By having skills, we can also reduce some of the shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, and birth trauma that comes from relying on choices only. As for the 3rd global childbirth trend, recovery of the mother and the baby, short and medium and long term. For those who want to continue into phase 2 of this pilot project, we're going to work with you more clearly so that you fully understand how your Webster technique and Birthing Better skills are like made in heaven to have a positive impact on the recovery of the mother-baby in the short, medium, and long term. What will stop this new revitalized concept from spreading? Well, it's not going to arise from women. It needs professional groups to encourage the women and the men you work with, the local midwives, doulas, childbirth educators, to all get on board and to ask your clients to tell their friends and families and to use social media to spread this concept. That's why it needs to be very clear and repeatable and replicable using those 8 fields. A simple idea. Keep it simple. When pregnant, self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, and then use your skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby. If you run into lots of yes buts, as I have, you just keep saying the same thing because the concept embraces all the yes buts. No matter what happens, being skilled means you do the activity better. We birth better. And you always want to direct people to a variety of skills-based methods so they do have choices. And for you, keep notes, simple ones. What skills-based method or methods did they choose? What skills did they learn? What successes did they have with the skills, and what were the gaps they experienced? And then you'll know more. And if you're working with midwives who are doing the same thing, or doulas or childbirth educators, have them keep notes or direct them to Common Knowledge Trust and we'll work with them. You might be very fond of the choice-based trend, and that's fine. Just encourage skills to couple with that. If you're a person who just believes there's no way to know what the birth's going to be like, still encourage skills, because it's better be skilled as the unknown unfolds than to feel something's just happening to you. If you're a firm believer in natural birth, just encourage skills. Because you know within natural birth, women can have trouble coping, or they can have very long labors, or they can suffer damage from the birth. Always remind your client that birth is an activity that you're doing, and that when you have skills that are appropriate to an activity and do that activity with skills, that you always do that activity better. Please now watch the pilot project video.